The first morning I drove up to the control shed on Red Mountain Pass. Both GASX units were showing a full propane supply on the monitoring software, but the physical gauges on the tanks read 30%. That discrepancy shouldn't have been possible. The system was designed so the digital readout mirrored the mechanical float inside each pressurized cylinder, and there was no scenario I'd been trained for where they could disagree. I'd been on the job 11 days. Transferred from CDOT's I-70 corridor crew outside Georgetown to the Southwest Region Avalanche program in early January. The move had been my idea. My marriage was finished by Thanksgiving, and the Georgetown house felt like a museum of someone else's decisions. So when the posting came through for an additional technician on the US 550 Red Mountain Pass crew, I took it like someone grabbing a branch on the way down a slope. Silverton, 9,300 feet. Population 700 in winter, if you counted generously. The kind of place where the grocery store closed at 4 and the loudest sound after dark was your own furnace cycling. My supervisor was a woman named Dara Lucero. 46, compact, brown hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of focused energy that made you feel like you were always slightly behind. She'd been running the Red Mountain Avalanche program for 9 years. When I arrived, she drove me up the pass in a state truck with tire chains already mounted and showed me every slide path by name. East Riverside, West Riverside, Brooklands, Mother Klein, Champion, Longfellow, like she was introducing me to neighbors. Each one had its own personality, she said. Some were polite, some were liars. That first week was orientation. Learning the remote systems, 2 GASX exploders near the summit, 3 Obelix units on the north face, plus the older howitzer positions we still used when conditions demanded direct fire. Learning the forecasting rhythm, weather station data from the summit, snow pit analysis every 72 hours, coordination with the Colorado Avalanche Information Center out of Boulder. Learning the road closure protocols, the traffic control timing, the communication sequence with dispatch in Durango. But 11 days in, standing inside the metal equipment shelter at 10,800 feet, with wind pushing against the walls, I was looking at 2 gauges that disagreed with their own software. And the reason that mattered more than a maintenance footnote was that Dara had authorized a control mission for the next morning on East Riverside, one of the most active slide paths on the entire pass. And the GASX unit serving that path needed at least 40% propane capacity to fire reliably. If the digital reading was right, we had plenty. If the physical gauge was right, we didn't. I radioed down to Dara at the Silverton maintenance yard. She picked up on the second call. I explained the discrepancy. "Which gauge do you trust more?" she asked. "The mechanical. It's a float." A pause. Wind noise on her end, too. "Then we'll plan for a helicopter refuel before we shoot. Can you verify the oxygen side?" I checked. The oxygen tanks showed full on both digital and physical. Consistent. "Propane's the only disagreement," I said. "Could be a sensor wire issue. Could be a software glitch from the last update. Could be a leak," she said. That stopped me. A propane leak at an unstaffed mountain installation in January wouldn't necessarily be dangerous in the open air. The gas would dissipate, but it meant the system had been slowly bleeding fuel since the last helicopter service in November. 2 months of undetected loss. "I'll do a physical inspection," I said. "Sniff test, soap the fittings." "Take Wes with you tomorrow," she said. "Don't solo it in this wind." Wes Kearney was the other technician on the 3-person crew. Older than me by a decade, quiet, built like a fire hydrant. He'd been in the San Juans his entire career, started as a plow driver in 2004, moved into the Avalanche program after proving he could read snow better than most people with degrees. He didn't say much, but what he said usually mattered. That evening I sat in the rented house on Reese Street that CDOT subsidized for seasonal transfers and wrote up my discrepancy report on the state laptop. Outside, the temperature was dropping past 10 below. The town was silent in the way that only high mountain towns can be in January. Not dead, but held, compressed by cold into something denser than ordinary silence. I ate reheated chili from the diner on Blair Street and thought about the propane gauges. Something about the situation bothered me beyond the technical problem, and it took me until I was brushing my teeth to identify it. The last person to physically inspect those tanks had been Wes. His maintenance log from November 19th showed all readings consistent. Full tanks, digital and physical in agreement. Either something had changed between November and January, or the readings hadn't actually been consistent in November, and the log was wrong. I didn't know Wes well enough to know which possibility was more likely. The next morning was clear and brutal. 8 below at the Silverton yard, which meant 20 below in the pass with wind chill factored. Wes and I loaded the state truck with inspection gear, leak detection solution, a handheld gas analyzer, replacement sensor cable, and the diagnostic laptop for the GazeX control software. We also carried snowshoes and probes in case we needed to access the buried infrastructure lines running from the storage shelter to the exploder units. Wes drove. He knew the road in winter the way I knew the I-70 corridor. Every curve, every drift pattern, every spot where morning sun hit first and where ice lingered past noon. We climbed through the switchbacks north of Silverton, past the old Mayflower mine tailings, up through the tree line where the terrain opened into the white, wind-scoured alpine. Red Mountain Pass is not a gentle place in January. The peaks on either side are steep enough that snow doesn't accumulate on their faces. It falls, builds briefly, and then releases. That's why we existed. That's why the program had been running since 1972. Dara told me about the gauges, Wes said about halfway up. First words of the morning beyond good morning. Yeah, pretty clean discrepancy. Digital says full, mechanical says 30. He was quiet for a while, navigating a section where the plows had pushed the snowbank tight against the guardrail. November inspection, everything matched. I saw your log. You think I missed something? I didn't answer immediately because I wasn't sure how to. I think 2 months is a long time between physical checks at elevation. It is, he agreed. Used to be monthly. Budget cut the helicopter hours. Dara fought it. We parked at the maintenance pullout near milepost 80 and skinned up the slope to the equipment shelter on snowshoes. The shelter sat behind a rock outcropping that shielded it from the worst of the prevailing wind, a corrugated metal building roughly the size of a one-car garage, anchored to a concrete pad with bolts thick as my thumbs. Inside, 6 propane cylinders, 6 oxygen cylinders, the electronic control cabinet, the communications relay, and a small space heater that kept the electronics from freezing. The propane side was my focus. I soaped every fitting. The manifold connections, the regulator valves, the output lines running through the wall toward the GazeX tubes higher up the slope. Wes worked the diagnostic laptop, pulling data logs from the control board. 20 minutes in, I found it. A small, steady stream of bubbles at the junction where the main supply line connected to the distribution manifold. Not a catastrophic leak. A slow seep. The kind that would cost you 1% or 2% per week in cold weather. Got it, I said. Manifold junction. Probably a failed O-ring. Wes came over and looked. Son of a bitch. You couldn't have caught this in November if it wasn't leaking then, I offered. He shook his head. Maybe. Maybe not. I didn't soap the fittings in November, just checked the gauges. There it was, the honest admission. His November inspection had been a visual-only check. Gauges matched, so he'd marked it complete. Standard practice on a lot of crews, not best practice. The O-ring might have been degrading even then, just not leaking enough to register. I replaced the O-ring from our repair kit, a 10-minute job once you isolated the cylinder, and rechecked. Clean. No bubbles. But the tank was still at 30%, and we needed 40 for a reliable shot. I called Dara. Leak found and fixed, but we're at 30% confirmed on the primary propane bank. Need a refuel before we shoot East Riverside. Helicopters booked for Thursday, she said. Storm coming in Wednesday night. Can we wait? I looked out the shelter's small window at the slope above. East Riverside starting zone was visible from here, a broad, concave bowl that funneled into a steep gully. The snow in that bowl had been loading for 3 weeks. The CAIC forecast has the danger going considerable by tomorrow afternoon, I said. If East Riverside goes naturally before we can shoot it. It reaches the road, Dara finished. I know. Silence on the radio, wind buffeting the antenna. What about the howitzer? I asked. Wes looked up from the laptop. The howitzer, a Korean War-era 105mm that CDOT still maintained for situations exactly like this, was stored at the Silverton yard. Using it meant closing the highway, setting up a firing position and shooting explosive shells into the starting zone from below. It was the old way. Effective, but it required a crew of 3, road closure coordination, and perfect visibility. Wednesday's forecast is partly cloudy AM, storm arriving PM, Dara said. We could shoot at dawn Wednesday. If we get it done before the storm rolls in, we don't need the Gazex at all for this cycle. And if the storm comes early, Wes said, loud enough for the radio to pick up, then we close the road and wait it out, Dara said. Same as always. It was decided. We'd shoot East Riverside with the howitzer Wednesday morning. I drove back down to Silverton with Wes, and we spent the rest of Tuesday afternoon prepping, inspecting the gun, checking the ammunition inventory, loading the truck. The shells were stored in a locked magazine behind the maintenance shed, each one the size of a wine bottle and heavy as sin. Wes handled them with the careful familiarity of someone who'd been doing this for 15 years. That evening, I walked to the Avalanche Brewing Company on Blair Street, the only place in Silverton reliably open past 6 in January. 2 locals at the bar, a bartender named Mick, who recognized me for my first week. I ordered a beer and sat near the window watching the last light fade off the peaks. The mountains were enormous and close, pressing in on the town from 3 sides. In summer, this place must feel open, expansive. In winter, it felt sheltered but enclosed, like living inside cupped hands. Mick asked how the job was treating me. Cold, I said. He laughed. Give it till March, then it's cold and wet. A woman came in around 7, late 30s, dark coat, sat 3 stools down and ordered whiskey neat. I didn't pay attention until Mick said, Heather, you know the new CDOT guy? She looked over, direct brown eyes, a tired expression that suggested she'd been working. The Avalanche tech? Sean, I said. Heather Malloy. I run the EMS out here. She extended a hand without getting up, so I leaned to shake it. Her grip was strong and brief. You're the one they brought over from Georgetown? For the season, maybe longer. Well, she took a sip. Hope you like being trapped. I asked what she meant. Storm coming Wednesday. Red Mountain closes. Coal Bank closes. Every winter there's at least 2 or 3 stretches where we're the only people in the world as far as the road's concerned. Some people love it. Some people lose their minds. She said this without drama, like she was explaining which brand of propane the hardware store carried. I've worked mountain passes, I said. I-70 closes too. I-70 closes for a day. Red Mountain closes for a week. She finished her whiskey and stood. Welcome to Silverton. She left a 5 on the bar and walked out into the cold. Mick wiped the spot where her glass had been. She's not wrong, he said. Last February, we were cut off for 9 days. Town did fine, we're used to it, but your crew couldn't access the pass at all. Everything just sat. 9 days. I thought about East Riverside sitting loaded with 3 weeks of accumulated snow, and the propane tank at 30%, and the helicopter that wouldn't come until Thursday, and the storm arriving Wednesday afternoon. Everything about this timeline felt compressed, like the schedule was squeezing us toward a single narrow window. Wednesday morning, 4 a.m. I drove to the yard in darkness, so complete it felt solid. Stars overhead, no moon. The temperature readout on the truck said -17. Wes was already there, truck running, heater blowing. Dara arrived 5 minutes after me, thermos of coffee in hand, her face tight with the look of someone who'd already checked the weather twice and didn't like what she'd seen. "Storm's accelerating," she said. "CAIC bumped the arrival time up to noon. We have maybe 6 hours of visibility." "We need 2, Wes said. "Set up to clean up." "Then let's not be slow." We convoyed up the pass in the dark, Dara's truck leading with the howitzer trailer, Wes and me following in the support vehicle. The road was empty. No one drives Red Mountain Pass at 4 a.m. in January, voluntarily. The plows had run at midnight, so the surface was clean but glazed. Our tire chains crunched in the silence. The firing position for East Riverside was at milepost 82, a pullout on the uphill side of the road with a direct line of sight to the starting zone. We'd already coordinated the road closure with dispatch in Durango. The pass was officially shut at 3:30 a.m., with gates closed at both ends. No traffic. Setting up the howitzer takes longer than people expect. The gun is a 105mm M101A1, a towed piece that dates to the Korean War. CDOT has maintained 7 of them across the state for decades, though the program was winding down in favor of remote systems. This one, serial number I'd memorized during the training, weighed about 2 tons with the trailer. We positioned it on the pullout, leveled the trails, set the aiming stakes by headlamp. Wes handled the rounds. High explosive shells with point detonating fuses. Each one designed to go off on impact with the snow surface, sending a shock wave into the weak layers below. By the time we were ready to fire, the first gray light was creeping over the ridgeline to the east. I could see the East Riverside starting zone now, a broad white face, smooth and loaded. The convexity at the top of the bowl was pronounced. Classic setup. The snow wanted to go. Dara handled communications. She confirmed the road clear with dispatch, confirmed the shot plan with CAIC, and then gave West the authorization. He loaded the first round, checked the elevation, and fired. The sound was enormous in the winter stillness, a flat, concussive thump that echoed off the canyon walls and rolled away into the distance. I watched through binoculars. The shell impacted near the top of the bowl, detonating with a flash and a puff of gray smoke. For a moment, nothing. Then the entire face moved. It started as a crack, a fracture line running laterally across the slope, maybe 400 feet wide. Then the slab released as a unit, accelerating downhill with a sound like a freight train dragging gravel. The snow poured into the gully, channeling and compressing, picking up speed and mass as it descended through the run-out zone and spread across the debris fan at the bottom. The debris crossed the highway. We'd expected that. East Riverside reaches the road on roughly half its full path releases. The pile was maybe 8 feet deep where it covered the asphalt, stretching 60 yards along the highway. A plowed section would need to be cleared before the road could reopen, assuming the storm allowed it. "Good shot," Dara said. "One and done." Wes lowered the breech. "Want me to hit the secondary zone?" Dara scanned the slope above with her binoculars. There was a secondary pocket on the skier's right of the main bowl, a smaller accumulation zone that sometimes released sympathetically but hadn't moved today. "One more," she decided, "while we have visibility." Wes loaded the second round, adjusted elevation slightly, fired. This one detonated in the secondary zone. A smaller release, maybe 200 feet wide, slid perhaps 400 vertical feet and stopped above the road. No debris on the highway. "Clean." "That'll hold," Wes said. We secured the gun, policed the brass, and loaded the trailer. The whole operation took an hour and 40 minutes from first round to departure. Textbook. I felt the clean satisfaction of work done correctly and on time. In the east, clouds were building, the front arriving, right on the accelerated schedule. We were back in Silverton by 8:30 a.m. The maintenance crew with the front-end loader would head up to clear the debris pile when conditions allowed. For now, the road stayed closed. The storm was coming in regardless. By noon, the sky was grey and low, snow falling at an inch per hour. By evening, it was 3 inches per hour, and the wind had built to sustained 40, with gusts near 60 on the ridgelines. I sat in my rented house, listening to the building creak and checking the remote monitoring software on my laptop. The Gazek system reported normally, our repaired propane tank holding steady, Obelk's units showing green status, temperature and wind sensors updating every 15 minutes. The storm continued through Wednesday night, all day Thursday, into Friday morning. This wasn't unusual for the San Juans in January. Multi-day events that dropped 3, 4, 5 feet on the pass were part of the normal cycle, but the forecasts kept revising upward. What was supposed to be 18 to 24 inches was now calling for 48 to 60. The avalanche danger was being pushed from considerable to high. Friday afternoon, Dara called the crew to the maintenance yard for a planning session. The 3 of us sat in the break room with maps of the pass spread on the table, slide path overlays, run-out zones, the locations of every piece of equipment. CAIC is going to go extreme by tomorrow morning, she said. They're recommending full closure with no mitigation attempts until the storm clears and we can get visibility. How long? I asked. Models show this breaking Sunday evening, maybe Monday morning. Wes leaned back in his chair. That's 4 feet of new snow on top of the load we already had. Mother Klein's going to go. Brooklyn's for sure. Champion might go big. That's the scenario, Dara agreed. When it clears, we're going to have multiple paths to address, possibly with natural releases already on the road. The loader can't get up there until we clear the debris from Wednesday's chute, plus whatever else has come down naturally. Do we have enough rounds for a full pass mission? I asked. Dara checked her inventory sheet. 34 shells in the magazine. That's enough for 3 missions if we're efficient, but... She paused. I got a call from Region this morning. The helicopter they promised for Thursday got diverted to Wolf Creek Pass. There was a natural cycle down there that buried some county infrastructure. They don't know when we get it back. No helicopter meant no propane refuel for the Gazeks. It also meant no Obelk's reset. The Bells needed helicopter service every 30 fires, and 2 of the 3 were approaching that limit. So we're artillery only until further notice, Wes said. Essentially. I looked at the map. 26 monitored slide paths between the summit and the Ouray County line. Some of them small, manageable, unlikely to reach the road even in a full path release. But 10 or 12 were road-impacting paths, and East Riverside was just one of them. When did this become the old days? I said. It was a half-joke. Nobody laughed. Saturday, the storm intensified. 6 inches per hour at the summit weather station, with winds creating massive cornices on the east-facing slopes. I spent the day monitoring from my laptop, running through the software's automated alert thresholds. Every sensor on the pass was reporting conditions that exceeded our normal control parameters. But we couldn't access the pass. The road was buried under what I estimated was 3 feet of fresh snow plus whatever had slid naturally. Sunday morning, I walked to the diner on Blair Street for breakfast. The town was quiet, but functional. People moved between buildings with the purposeful efficiency of a community accustomed to being sealed in. The hardware store was open. The gas station was pumping. The school was closed, but that was normal for the weekend. It occurred to me that Silverton had been surviving these closures for 140 years. The mining era isolation was worse. No plowed highway at all, just the narrow-gauge railroad that itself stopped running in winter. These people knew how to wait. Heather Malloy was at the diner. She sat across from me at the counter without asking. "How many paths you think have gone?" she asked. Impossible to say without visibility, but based on the loading and the wind direction, 6, maybe 8 natural releases. Any of them reach town? No, the town's protected by the valley geometry. The paths that concern us run toward the highway. She nodded, stirring her coffee. County's asking about road access to Ouray. Hospitals there. We've got a woman at 37 weeks and a man with a cardiac history who missed his last appointment. When the storm breaks, we have to clear the highway before anyone drives it. That's not optional. There could be debris piles 10, 15 feet deep at multiple locations. I know. I'm just telling you what my end looks like. That afternoon, something changed in the monitoring data. The wind shifted from southwest to northwest, an unusual pattern that loaded the north-facing slopes that normally stayed scoured. Paths that hadn't been a priority suddenly became loaded. I called Dara. I see it, she said. Mother Klein's north aspect just got hit with a different fetch. That's... She trailed off. I could hear her working through it. Mother Klein was one of the largest paths on the pass. A full path release there had historically produced debris piles 30 feet deep on the road. If Mother Klein goes big, I said, the loader can't clear it. We'd need a dozer from Durango, which can't get here because the road is closed. We sat with that. Storm breaks Sunday evening per the models, she said. Monday we go up at first light with everything we've got, shoot what we can, but if the naturals have already deposited, we deal with it one pile at a time. I agreed. There was nothing else to do. We were on the downstream side of physics, waiting. Sunday evening, just after 9. The snow slowed, then stopped. I stepped outside my rented house and looked up. Stars appearing through breaks in the cloud cover. The temperature was already falling. The clear sky radiation was going to push everything well below zero by dawn. That rapid cooling could potentially stabilize some slopes, but the load was already there. What had been deposited during the storm wasn't going away. I slept poorly. At 3:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. Dara's text. Yard at 5, full kit. Monday, January 21st. I will remember that date. The three of us convoyed up the pass at first light. The plow crew had made a single pass ahead of us, cutting a narrow lane through the fresh snow. On either side, the walls of plowed snow rose above the truck roof. We drove slowly. Every few hundred yards, we passed evidence of natural releases. Debris fans of chunked, dense avalanche snow spilling across the road from the slopes above. Some were small enough to push through with the truck. Others required us to stop and wait while the loader, following behind us, pushed the material aside. It took 2 hours to reach milepost 80, a distance that normally took 20 minutes. What we found at the East Riverside run-out zone was what I expected. Our Wednesday debris pile, now buried under 3 feet of new snow, plus a second natural release that had stacked on top of it. A combined pile maybe 12 feet deep across a 100-yard section of highway. Manageable with time and equipment. But when we rounded the corner at milepost 82 and looked up toward Mother Klein, I understood that everything had changed. The entire path had released. Not in a controlled way. This was a full-depth, ground-scraping, 1,000-vertical-foot natural avalanche that had occurred sometime during the storm. The debris field was enormous. It covered the highway for nearly a quarter of a mile, and the depth at the center was at least 20 feet. Mixed in with the snow were broken trees, rock fragments, and soil. The air smelled of freshly exposed earth, even in the freezing cold. Dara stopped her truck and stared. Jesus, Wes said. That's not clearable with what we have, I said. Dara was quiet for a long time. She got out of the truck, walked to the edge of the debris, and stood looking up at the now bare starting zone. The entire slope was stripped, brown earth and rock visible where 3 weeks of snow had been. The fracture crown at the top was visible even from the road, a vertical wall of snow 8 or 9 feet high, extending across the full width of the starting zone. Call it in, she said finally. We need the dozer, and I need to know what else has come down between here and Ouray. I made the call to dispatch in Durango on the satellite phone. Our cell coverage was spotty on the pass even in good conditions. The dispatcher, a man named Paul I'd spoken to several times, confirmed he'd route the message to region. But he warned that Coalbank Pass, south of Silverton, was also showing multiple deposits, and Molas Pass beyond that had taken a natural cycle too. "You're saying Silverton is cut off from both directions," I said. "Durango side is passable with a loader. We can have a route punched through Coalbank by tomorrow. But your side, Ouray side, that's going to be days." I relayed this to Dara. She absorbed it without expression. Days meant the road to Ouray. The hospital, the larger community, the connected world, was inaccessible. Silverton was an island, not because of some infrastructure collapse or communication failure, simply because the mountains had done what mountains do, and we didn't have the machinery in the right place to undo it quickly. We spent the rest of Monday shooting what we could. Wes put rounds into Champion and Longfellow. Both released controlled slides that deposited on the road, but in manageable amounts. We skipped paths that had already released naturally during the storm. By mid-afternoon, we'd used 14 rounds and cleared 3 additional debris zones with the loader. The highway from Silverton to milepost 84 was passable. But Mother Klein sat immovable between milepost 84 and the summit, and beyond that, on the Ouray side, we had no information at all about conditions. That evening, Dara asked me to stay after the debrief. "The propane leak," she said. "How long do you think it was going before you caught it?" "Based on the loss rate and the tank volume, 6 weeks minimum, probably since late November." She looked at her desk. "Wes's November inspection should have caught it." "He didn't soap the fittings. Visual only." "I know. He told me." She rubbed her face. "That's on me too. I should have had a protocol requiring it. We used to before we lost the helicopter hours. The schedule got compressed. Things got abbreviated." "The howitzer worked fine today," I said. "We got East River side before the storm. The leak didn't cause a failure." "This time." She met my eyes. "But if the helicopter doesn't come back for another 2 weeks, if the remote systems are the only thing between the next storm cycle and a natural release on a path we can't reach with the gun, then that 30% tank is a problem that matters." I didn't argue. She was right. Tuesday brought clear skies and savage cold. -22 at the Silverton yard at dawn. The town continued functioning. The school reopened, the gas station pumped, the diner served breakfast. Heather Malloy stopped me on Green Street as I walked to the yard. "My pregnant patient is having contractions," she said. "Irregular, probably Braxton Hicks, but she's nervous. The cardiac patient missed his meds delivery. It was supposed to come over the pass from the Ouray pharmacy. Coalbank should be open by tonight. You can get to Durango that way. That's 3 hours in good conditions. If she goes into real labor." "How far along?" 37 weeks. Could be fine. Could be early." I looked at her. There was no request in her expression. She was informing me of the stakes, not asking me to fix them. But the implication was clear. Every day the Ouray road stayed blocked was a day her patients lived with additional risk. "I'll tell Dara," I said. "But clearing Mother Klein, that's not something we can accelerate with what we have." "I know." She turned to go, then turned back. "The town will be fine. We always are, but it helps to know someone's aware of the timeline." She walked away, and I stood in the cold street feeling the weight of a responsibility I hadn't expected. I'd come here to fire shells at mountainsides and maintain gas systems. Now I was carrying the awareness that a woman's pregnancy and a man's heart were tethered to how fast we could move 20 feet of frozen debris off a highway. The dozer arrived Wednesday, transported over Coalbank Pass from Durango on a lowboy trailer, a D6 Cat, yellow and enormous, driven by a contractor named Gill who'd been clearing mountain highways for 20 years. He'd worked with Dara before. "Show me the pile," he said. We drove him up to Mother Klein. He stood at the edge of the debris field, chewing the inside of his cheek, estimating volume. 3 days, he said. Maybe 4. Depends on what's frozen solid and what I can push. Any way to expedite? Get me another dozer. He looked at me like I'd asked if water was wet. Gil started work that afternoon. The sound of the cat's engine echoed off the canyon walls, a mechanical drone that carried down to Silverton on still mornings. Progress was visible, but incremental. Each pass of the blade moved perhaps 2 yards of compacted avalanche debris. The material was dense, partially frozen, interlaced with tree fragments. Not like plowing snow. More like carving concrete. Meanwhile, the weather models showed another system forming, not as intense as the previous one, but enough to add another foot or 2 to the snowpack, and, critically, to add wind loading to slopes we hadn't been able to shoot. Thursday morning, Dara gathered us again. CAIC is going to raise the danger back to considerable by Friday, she said. We've got paths that loaded during the storm and haven't been mitigated. The Gazex is at 30%. The Obelix units are past their service interval. The howitzer is our primary tool. How many rounds do we have left? Wes asked. 20, and Regent says the next ammunition shipment isn't scheduled until February 1st. 20 rounds for 12 road-impacting paths, with another storm coming. We need to prioritize, I said. Which paths are most loaded, most likely to release naturally, and most consequential if they hit the road? Dara nodded. That's the work for today. CAIC will give us their assessment. We'll compare it with our own observations and build a shot plan. We spent the afternoon on the pass. What parts we could access. The air was clear and cold, and for the first time since the storm, I could see the full scope of what had happened. The north face of Red Mountain looked different, stripped. Multiple starting zones lay bare, their debris fanned across the valley floor. The snowshed at East Riverside, a concrete structure built decades ago to shield the highway from exactly this kind of event, had done its job on one path, but the volume had overwhelmed the exit end, piling debris 15 feet high at the tunnel mouth. Wes and I climbed above the road to examine 2 starting zones that hadn't released, Brooklands and a path called the Schoolhouse. Both were deeply loaded. The snowpack analysis was textbook for instability, 4 feet of new snow over a faceted weak layer that I could identify by touch, the grains collapsing between my fingers like sugar crystals. These are going, Wes said, not a question. Within the next loading event, maybe before. Brooklands hits the road at milepost 79. If that goes while Gil is working at Mother Klein. We looked at each other. The geometry was inescapable. Gil and his dozer were working between mileposts 84 and 85. The Brooklands run-out zone crossed at milepost 79. If Brooklands released naturally while Gil was on the highway, even miles away, the standard operating procedure required that no one be on the road during high or above danger ratings without active mitigation having been completed. But Gil couldn't clear Mother Klein if the road was closed due to avalanche danger, and the road couldn't be opened until Mother Klein was cleared, and Brooklands couldn't be mitigated without either firing the howitzer, which required road access and visibility, or using the Gazex, which was at 30% and serving a different path. Circular problem, I said. Wes kicked at the snow with his boot. Been doing this 15 years. Sometimes the mountain wins the week and you just wait. I thought about Heather's pregnant patient. Some people can't wait. That evening I did something I hadn't done before. I walked to Heather's office. It was in the back of the volunteer fire station on Cement Street, a small room with a desk, a radio, and a cot for overnight shifts. She was there, reviewing something on a laptop. Update, I said. Mother Klein clearance is 3 more days minimum. Dozer's working, but it's massive, and we've got another storm Friday night. She closed the laptop. Angela, the pregnant woman, saw a doctor over telemedicine today. He says she's fine, Braxton Hicks confirmed. But if she goes into active labor before 38 weeks, she needs a hospital. And the cardiac patient? Tom. He's got enough meds for another 6 days if he rations. After that. She shrugged. It's not immediately life-threatening, but it's not good. Coal banks open to Durango, I reminded her. 3-hour drive, in winter, for a woman in labor. She leaned back. It's an option. It's not a good one. I stood in her doorway, feeling the familiar helplessness of knowing a problem existed without having the authority or resources to solve it. But Heather wasn't looking for me to solve it. She was doing what she'd done at the diner, making sure someone outside her own office understood the full picture, building shared awareness. I'll tell Dara, I said again. I already have. Heather smiled slightly. I tell everyone. That's my job. Friday. The second storm arrived as predicted, lighter than the first, but with sustained northwest winds that continued loading the problematic north-facing aspects. Gil pulled off the highway at noon when visibility dropped. Progress on Mother Klein. Roughly 40% cleared. He'd carved a one-lane path through the western portion of the debris, but the deepest section, Center Road, remained. The Gazek's monitoring showed something new. A temperature spike inside the propane storage shelter. Not extreme, but anomalous. Normally, the shelter sat between 20 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit due to the small space heater. The reading showed 41. I flagged it for Dara. Heater malfunction, she suggested. Maybe, or the thermostat's drifting. Worth an in-person check when we can get up there. After the storm. After the storm. Everything was after the storm. Saturday, the wind peaked. Gusts of 70 miles per hour at the Summit weather station. I sat in my house watching the data stream on the laptop, watching the loading estimates climb. Brooklands was now holding what CAIC estimated at 400% of its normal trigger threshold. The schoolhouse was similar. 2 other paths on the Ouray side, which we couldn't even see, let alone access, were surely loaded as well. At 2:15 p.m., the monitoring system registered a seismic event. Not earthquake. The accelerometers we placed near known slide paths detected ground vibration consistent with a large avalanche. The signal came from the sensor nearest Brooklands. I called Dara. Brooklands just went natural. You sure? Seismic signature. I don't have visual, but the accelerometer at milepost 78 spiked. Size? Based on the duration, 4 seconds of sustained vibration, I'd estimate D3 or larger. Full path possible. Silence, then. Gil isn't on the road. I know, but if the debris covers the highway between 78 and 80, then our one route to the upper pass just got blocked from this side, too. I stared at the data on my screen. Silverton was now potentially cut off from the pass in both directions. Mother Klein blocking from above, Brooklands blocking from below. The only way the pass could function was if both debris fields were cleared, and now we had 2 instead of 1. We won't know for sure until we get eyes on it, Dara said. Tomorrow if the storm breaks. It broke overnight. Sunday morning dawned bright and windless. The sky, that impossible blue you only see in Colorado, above 10,000 feet after a storm. The mountains were white and pristine and utterly indifferent to the people living below them. We drove up from Silverton at first light. Within 10 minutes we had our answer. Brooklands had released full path, and the debris had crossed the highway at milepost 79, depositing a field approximately 15 feet deep and 80 yards long. Gil stood beside his idling dozer, which was parked on the town side of the new debris pile, and looked at it. Well, he said. Can you clear this one first? Dara asked. This is between town and Mother Klein. I can, but every day I spend here is a day I'm not up there. The arithmetic was brutal. 3 more days on Mother Klein. Now at least 2 days on Brooklands. 5 days minimum. Another storm was possible by midweek. "I need a second machine," Gil said. "You need to call Region and get another dozer over Coal Bank." Dara made the call. Region said they'd try. The resources were stretched. This same storm cycle had hit Wolf Creek, Monarch, Berthoud. Everyone wanted equipment. I spent Sunday afternoon with Wes examining the remaining unmitigated paths from what vantage points we could reach. The schoolhouse was still loaded and hadn't released. 2 paths called Upper and Lower Brooklyn, distinct from the main Brooklyns, were showing fresh wind deposits. And our biggest remaining concern was a path on the north side called the Widowmaker, which had a starting zone we couldn't see from the road at all. "If Widowmaker goes natural," Wes said, "it hits the snowshed from above. The shed isn't designed for that angle." "What do you mean?" "The snowshed on the north side, at milepost 83. It's built to deflect paths coming from the east. Widowmaker comes from the northeast. If it releases full path and hits the shed at that angle, there's a chance it could damage the structure." "Has that happened before?" 1992, before my time, broke 2 roof beams. The road was closed for 3 weeks while they shored it up. I wrote it in my field notebook. Another variable, another path we needed to shoot but couldn't reach. Monday morning. Gil started on Brooklyns. Dara, Wes, and I held a strategy session in the yard. "The howitzer," Dara said. "Can we set up a position on the town side of the Brooklyns debris and shoot the schoolhouse from there?" I looked at the map. The schoolhouse starting zone was at approximately milepost 78.5. If we set up the gun below milepost 78, before the Brooklyns debris, we might have a line of sight to the starting zone. It would be a longer shot than normal, at the edge of the weapon's effective range for this kind of terrain. 1,500 meters, Wes said, measuring with his finger on the topo map. "We've shot that far on Champion before." "With good visibility and no wind," I added. "Today is good visibility and no wind," Dara said. We looked at each other. The question was whether to use 2 of our remaining 20 rounds on a marginal shot or save them for paths we could reach from better positions once the road was clear. "If Schoolhouse goes natural before we clear Brooklyns," Wes said, "it deposits on top of the Brooklyns debris. Gil has to clear both. Adds another day." "But if we miss," I started, "then we've wasted 2 rounds and we're at 18 for whatever comes next." Dara made the decision. "We shoot, today. The risk of Schoolhouse going natural in the next 48 hours is higher than the risk of missing from that distance." We set up at milepost 77.5. The position was less than ideal, slightly below the optimal angle, with the shot traveling uphill at about 15 degrees above horizontal. The range was 1,400 meters. The target was a specific concavity in the starting zone where Wes identified the most likely trigger point. Wes loaded. Dara confirmed clear road, confirmed CAIC authorization. Wes fired. Through binoculars, I watched the round impact. High, above the target by perhaps 50 meters, detonating on a rocky ridgeline above the snow. "Miss," I said. Wes adjusted, lowered the elevation by 3 clicks, loaded the second round. Fired. This one hit snow. The detonation sent up a white plume exactly where Wes had aimed. I watched the slope above and below the impact point, looking for fracture propagation. Nothing moved. We waited. 1 minute. 2. The slope held. "Stubborn," Wes said. "Or we didn't hit the sweet spot," Dara said. "The weak layer might be deeper here than what Sean observed Thursday." 2 rounds spent, no result. 18 remaining. I felt it in my stomach, the particular nausea of resources spent without return. In a job where every shell is tracked, inventoried, and reported, 2 misses weren't a disaster, but they were a loss that made the next decision harder. We packed up and drove back to town. The afternoon was quiet, Gil working on Brooklyns, the sound of his dozer carrying through the clear air. I walked to the grocery store, bought canned soup and bread, and went home to review the monitoring data. The temperature anomaly in the Gazex shelter had resolved, back to 30 degrees. Whatever caused the spike, thermostat drift, brief heater malfunction, hadn't recurred. But it nagged at me. The propane cylinders were stored in that shelter. If the heater malfunctioned high, if temperatures rose significantly above normal, the pressure relief valves on the cylinders could vent gas. More propane loss. I documented it, added it to my growing file of observations that might matter or might not. Tuesday. A day that began with an event that changed the calculus entirely. At 6:40 a.m., still dark, the seismic sensor at milepost 83 registered a prolonged event. 7 seconds of sustained ground vibration. I was in bed, laptop open on the nightstand. The alert woke me. I stared at the data, then called Dara. "Widowmaker," I said. "Time. 6:40, duration 7 seconds. That's a D4 at minimum." I could hear her sitting up. "The snowshed. We can't see it from here. We need to get up there." "Nobody goes above Brooklands until Gil clears a path." "Dara, if the snowshed is damaged, if Widowmaker hit it the way West described from 92, I know what it means. It means even after we clear the debris, the road might not be safe until the structure is inspected." We met at the yard at 7. Wes was already there. He'd seen the alert too. The three of us stood around the map table, looking at the section of highway between milepost 83 and the summit. "If the shed took damage," Wes said, "we need an engineer before we open the road." "Nearest structural engineer is Durango," Dara said, "or Montrose. So we clear Brooklands, clear Mother Klein, then find out the snowshed is broken and the road stays closed anyway." I said it flat, without emotion, because emotion wasn't useful. Dara's jaw tightened. "We don't know the shed is damaged. We know Widowmaker released. We don't know the debris hit the shed or the shed took damage." "The angle," Wes started. "We don't know," Dara repeated. "Not until we see it." She was right, but we couldn't see it. The shed was 3 miles above Brooklands debris, which Gil estimated another full day to clear. Then Mother Klein, still 60% blocked, sat between the Brooklands clearance and the shed. "Can someone get there on foot?" I asked. They both looked at me. "Snowshoes from the Brooklands debris up the highway, which is buried under the storm snow, 3 miles to the shed. Inspect it. Come back." "In avalanche terrain," Wes said, "with paths that haven't been shot. In high danger." "The paths above that section have already released," I said. "Widowmaker went this morning. The starting zone is empty. Brooklands went Saturday. East Riverside we shot last week. The biggest risks in that corridor have already cycled." Dara looked at the map, looked at me, looked at Wes. "The schoolhouse didn't release," she said. "Milepost 78.5. You'd walk right through its run-out zone." I hadn't thought of that. The path we'd failed to trigger Monday, still loaded, still unstable, and its run-out zone crossed the highway exactly where someone walking from the Brooklands debris toward the upper pass would be exposed. "We can't walk through the schoolhouse zone," Wes said. "Not in this danger rating. That's a no-go." "What if we can get above it?" I said. "Climb the slope on the south side, out of the path, and traverse above the run-out zone, then drop back to the road above milepost 79. Wes shook his head slowly. "On what? 4 feet of unconsolidated snow. In terrain you've been here 2 weeks and don't know?" He was right. I was reaching, wanting to solve a problem by moving my body at it, which is the instinct of someone who can't stand inaction. "We wait," Dara said. "Gil clears Brooklands. Then we drive to Mother Klein. Then we drive to the shed. We do it in order." I wanted to argue. I didn't. She was the program lead. She had 9 years of San Juan experience, and she was correct. The desire to know the answer immediately was not a justification for risking a human life in an avalanche path. But the waiting was corrosive, and Heather's patients were still waiting, and the town, though functional, though accustomed, was watching the pass with the particular attention of people who know that connection is not guaranteed. Tuesday afternoon, the second dozer arrived. Transported over Coal Bank from Durango, driven by a quiet man in a CDOT hard hat who didn't introduce himself. He went straight to work alongside Gil at the Brooklands deposit, and by Wednesday noon, the path was clear. Both machines then moved uphill toward Mother Klein. Wednesday afternoon, clear skies. Dara, Wes, and I drove past the cleared Brooklands site and continued up the pass. The road above was unplowed and buried, but the state truck with chains handled it well enough at low speed. We weren't clearing the road, we were scouting. At milepost 83, we found the snowshed. The structure was intact. Widowmaker's debris had deposited heavily against the north wall, packed snow 30 feet high against the concrete, but the roof beams showed no visible distress. The road beneath the shed was clear, as designed. Whatever angle the Avalanche had taken, it hadn't exceeded the shed's design parameters. Dara put her hand against the concrete wall like she was checking a fever. "We're okay." Wes was examining the upstream side where snow had funneled against the portal. "Clearable. The dozers can push this in half a day." I felt relief so strong it was physical, a loosening in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. The shed was the last unknown. With the shed intact, the timeline was mechanical. Clear the remaining debris, plow the road, and the pass would open. On the drive back down, we passed through the schoolhouse's run-out zone. I looked up at the starting zone, still white, still loaded, still holding. "We need to shoot that before we open the road," I said. "We will," Dara said. "Thursday. We can position the gun at milepost 78 now that Brooklands is clear. Good angle, proper range. And if it doesn't release, then it doesn't release, and we open with advisories, but we give it our best shot." Thursday morning, the howitzer at milepost 78. Clean sight line to the schoolhouse starting zone. Range 900 meters. Perfect conditions. Clear, cold, no wind. Wes fired 2 rounds. The first impacted center-left of the bowl. Nothing. The second, center-right. The slope shattered. The fracture line ran the full width of the starting zone, 300 feet at least, and the slab released with a violence I could feel through the ground. The avalanche ran full path, channeled into the gully, and spread across the highway at milepost 78.5. The debris was manageable. Perhaps 10 feet deep, 40 yards wide. The dozers could clear it in hours. "Now it's clear," Wes said, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I heard something like warmth in his voice. Friday. Both dozers on Mother Klein, now working from the east side where Gil had already carved a lane. The second dozer attacking from the west. They'd meet in the middle. Saturday at the latest. Friday evening I walked to the Avalanche Brewing Company. The town's mood was different. People were talking louder, laughing more. The road to Durango over Coal Bank had been open since Tuesday, so technically Silverton wasn't fully isolated. But the pass to Ouray was the connection that mattered to daily life, the hospital, the supply route, the commute for the handful of people who worked in both towns. Heather was at the bar again. She raised her glass when I came in. "Angela went to Durango," she said. "Yesterday, over Coal Bank, 38 weeks now. She's staying with her sister until the baby comes." Smart. Tom got his meds via the same route. Slow but functional. I sat beside her. So the timeline pressure resolved. For now. She smiled, genuine. Tired. The town handles it. We always do. But faster is still better than slower. I ordered a beer. Mick poured without asking what kind. He'd learned my preference. The window showed the last light on the peaks, alpenglow painting the snow pink and gold. "Dara said the pass opens Sunday if the dozers stay on schedule," I said. 10 days, Heather said. That's about average for a bad January cycle. Felt longer. First one always does. Saturday. The dozers met in the middle of Mother Klein. By afternoon, a single lane was open through the debris field, rough, narrow, but passable for a plow. The plow crew ran Sunday morning at 4 a.m., and by 8 o'clock the full route from Silverton to Ouray was cleared, inspected, and opened. I drove over the pass that afternoon. Not for any reason. No errand in Ouray, no obligation. I just wanted to see it open. The highway wound through the canyon above Silverton, past the now familiar slide paths, each one a name, a personality, a pattern of behavior I'd spent 3 weeks studying with the urgency of someone learning a language under threat. East Riverside, where we'd made the textbook shot. Brooklands, where the natural release had changed everything. The schoolhouse, stubborn until it wasn't. Mother Klein, immovable until Gill and the second dozer proved otherwise. The snowshed at milepost 83, standing solid against Widowmaker's fury. At the summit, I pulled over. 11,000 feet. The wind cut through my coat immediately. I walked to the Gazek's control shelter, the same shelter where I'd found the propane leak 3 weeks earlier. Inside, the repaired fitting was dry. The tank still read 30%. The digital and physical gauges now agreed, which meant the software glitch had either self-corrected or the discrepancy had always been the leak itself, creating a slow divergence. I stood there for a moment, in that small corrugated metal room at nearly 11,000 feet, surrounded by oxygen and propane cylinders and humming electronics, and I thought about what Wes had said about his November inspection. The visual-only check. The abbreviation that saved 20 minutes and missed a failing O-ring. Every disaster I'd ever read about in incident reports had the same structure. A small omission, compounded by circumstances, discovered under pressure. The O-ring didn't cause a crisis. The storm caused the crisis. The O-ring just ensured we entered the crisis with one less tool than we should have had. If the storm had been smaller, or the helicopter hadn't been diverted, or the budget hadn't cut the inspection frequency, the leak would have been fixed routinely and never mattered. But it did matter. It mattered because when Brooklands was loading and we needed to shoot it remotely, we couldn't. We had to make a marginal shot with the howitzer at extended range and miss. We burned 2 of our 20 rounds on a target the Gazeks might have handled cleanly. And when Schoolhouse finally needed attention, we were down to 16 rounds instead of 20, which meant every remaining decision carried more weight. I didn't blame Wes. I didn't even think he'd done anything unusual. Most field technicians do visual-only checks when time is short, and gauges agree. The system was designed to catch discrepancies at the next inspection. The problem was that next inspection had been pushed from 4 weeks to 8 weeks by a budget decision made in Denver by someone who'd never stood in this shelter in January. When I got back to Silverton that evening, I wrote my end-of-events summary. I included the propane leak, the sensor discrepancy, the O-ring failure, the missed November detection. I included the howitzer mission timeline, the round expenditure, the 2 misses at the schoolhouse. I included the seismic events, Brooklands natural, Widowmaker natural, and their consequences for road clearance. I included Dara's decision-making, which I described as sound throughout. I included Wes's admission about the visual-only inspection, which I described as consistent with common practice under reduced service schedules. Then I sat for a long time, deciding whether to include the sentence I'd drafted about the helicopter budget cuts. It was a factual statement. The helicopter service frequency had been reduced from monthly to bi-monthly by a regional budget decision in fiscal year 2023. This reduction meant the November inspection was the only physical check between October and January. If the original monthly schedule had been maintained, a December inspection would likely have detected the leak before any significant propane loss. Factual, accurate, and implicating a decision made well above my pay grade. I included it. Dara read my report Monday morning and didn't say anything for a while. Then, You know Region is going to push back on the helicopter paragraph. I know. You're comfortable with that. I documented what I observed. The rest is their problem. She nodded slowly. Okay. Paused. Good. February arrived. The pass stayed open for a 12-day stretch, longest since Christmas. I fell into the rhythm of the work. Daily monitoring, weekly snow pit analysis, coordination with CAIC, maintenance rounds on the remote systems when weather allowed. The helicopter finally came on February 8th, refueled the Gazex to full, serviced 2 of the 3 Obelks units. We were whole again. Wes and I developed something that wasn't quite friendship but was close, a working partnership built on shared difficulty. He never mentioned the O-ring again, and I never brought it up, but his February maintenance logs showed soap-tested fittings at every inspection, noted in detail. He'd absorbed the lesson without being told. Heather's pregnant patient, Angela, delivered a healthy girl on February 14th at the hospital in Durango. Heather told me over a beer, and I found myself unexpectedly moved. A life that had existed as a pressure variable in my decision-making was now a real person with a birthday. The rest of the winter was not uneventful. No San Juan winter is, but it was manageable. 2 more storm cycles, 4 more howitzer missions, 1 more natural release on a small path that barely reached the road. The Gazex fired successfully 3 times in March, the propane system working perfectly each time. The O-ring replacement held. In April, when the program wound down for the season and the snow was consolidating toward spring stability, I received a response from Region regarding my end-of-event summary. The helicopter budget paragraph had generated a review. An internal assessment had been initiated. No commitment to restored service frequency, but acknowledgement that the current schedule presented operational risk in extended storm cycles. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't even a change. It was a sentence in a document that might influence a budget line in a future fiscal year. But it existed because I'd written a paragraph and refused to delete it. On my last day in Silverton before transferring back to the I-70 corridor for summer, I drove up to the summit one final time. The snow was still deep, 6 feet on the ground in the starting zones, but softening, settling, losing the brittle hostility of midwinter. The Gazex tubes sat on their concrete pedestals above the slopes, silent. The Obelks units hung on their towers, waiting. The snowshed at milepost 83 stood solid, its concrete streaked with meltwater. I stopped at the pullout where we'd fired the howitzer in the dark on January 8th. That first mission, the textbook shot that brought down East Riverside before the storm. 3 months ago. It felt like a year. The valley was audible again. Meltwater running under the snowpack. Birds I couldn't name calling from the Krumholtz. A truck shifting gears somewhere below on the highway's curves. The valley wasn't quiet anymore. It was waking up, as it did every spring, like a body drawing its first full breath after a long, held pause. I drove down the pass, through the canyon, past each slide path, their names now written in my memory the way neighbors' names are written. I didn't look back at the summit. I'd be back in October, when the first snows returned and the system needed refueling and the slopes began their annual accumulation of weight and patience and potential. Dara had asked me to return for the next season. I'd said yes without hesitating, and the speed of my own certainty surprised me. Not because the work was glamorous. It was cold, technical, repetitive, occasionally terrifying, but because I'd found something in it that the Georgetown house had never contained. The sense that my attention mattered, that looking carefully at a gauge, reading a slope, writing an accurate report, these small acts of professional honesty connected to something larger than myself. A road open, a woman in labor reaching a hospital, a man getting his medication, a dozer operator safe from a path that had already been shot. The valley had gone quiet in January, and we'd brought it back to sound one shell, one dozer pass, one cleared mile at a time. That was the job. That was enough.